Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you very much to Asenko, a fantastic supporter of Africa Down Under and supporting this session. Thank you, panelists, for joining us once again. I won't go into full introductions as we've already met all of our panelists in this session. Thank you for staying along. I should point out this is just a prelude to the main South African investment luncheon panel discussion that we'll be having tomorrow at 1:15 upstairs on meetings on 5. So this is just to give you a little taster of what's to come. As Carl mentioned, my name's Dominic Piper. I'm the editor of Pay Dirt and Gold Mining Journal and chief box carrier at Africa Down Under. So if there's anything missing out of your bags, please let me know and I'll fill them up appropriately. We've got 30 minutes just before lunch to have a chat and unpick some of the comments that our speakers made. There will be a little bit of time for some questions as well, so hopefully we'll have a roving microphone. But I am a journalist, so I'll be greedy in asking most of the questions. I should point out, and I should say thank you to all of our speakers for a fascinating session. And I was getting a bit worried when Errol mentioned rugby, and then I was satisfied when he only mentioned the Springboks and All Blacks, but then I started to worry, is that just actually a reflection of the poor estimation that the Wallabies are now held in by our greatest rivals, that they don't even merit a mention when talking about international competition? So I'm going to just assume you were being nice, Errol. There's so much to unpack, I think, in this session as everybody laid out. It seems like there's a fresh era, a new start for resources investment in South Africa. The South African government has been represented at this conference right from its very inception. And we've seen some ups and downs, sideways movements, backward movements. It's been a little bit of a salsa dance in the years gone by, but we feel like we're on the front foot again, and we're proud and privileged to be part of that and give South Africa a platform to perform. So, Minister, I would like to start with you now that the jet lag is moving away from your lower limbs. I wanted to ask, I was really fascinated by your discussion about reinvigoration of the exploration sector, but also the work on critical minerals policy and critical minerals strategy. Can I ask, what will success look like for South Africa in the critical mineral space, either in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years?
Critical minerals are the future. They form the basis for green economy. And we have a lot of them in South Africa. We have big deposits of minerals of the future. What will be a success? From where I'm seated, a success will be when South Africa will determine the value of its own critical minerals. For more than a century now, we have been subjected to bid to pot, and everybody else determines what happens with our minerals. We're a price taker. Everything depends on everybody else except ourselves. If we can have an impact and an influence on what we do with our critical minerals, that will be success for me.
Thank you very much. Mzila, can I ask you? You mentioned it was a really interesting point that almost critical is in the eye of the beholder, and what is critical for domestic use. How is the Minerals Council sort of forming its own understandings of what the phrase critical minerals means for the South African industry and economy?
Thanks for the question. So it's not about the Minerals Council forming its own view. I think it's about how we understand the role of these minerals from a country perspective. So it's really how we get involved in the national conversation. And we've been quite involved with the DMRE as well as Mintech and various other agencies. And the approach that we've taken is to say that, what is critical for South Africa and why? Having actually also spent time understanding why the definitions of critical minerals were what they have come to be for America, for Australia, for Canada, for China. And what we saw is that for those countries, it's firstly an economic drive. It's about the energy transition, securing supply for energy transition. And it's about the technology that will drive military supremacy. And given that these are global north, that is the primary, that's the priority. From a South African and an African perspective, I think the important thing is development and transition. And so when we looked at the definition of what will be critical for South Africa, it was, yes, including what those global north have defined, but perhaps less emphasis on the military supremacy, but certainly economic drive. Look at the critical minerals which South Africa has dominance in, which means that, there's sustainability, and with that will come, social benefit. And so it was looking at across those different dimensions, but also the need to make sure that we also able to embark on the transition in a way that is just. And that then is beginning to spit out a few commodities more than or equal to what the first world has defined for themselves.
Thank you, Mzila. Back to you, Minister. We mentioned several times the influence of the global north and of international supply chains and value addition of critical minerals. Has the government had conversations with international players? We see here in Australia, the likes of China, the US, Japan and Korea very active in that space. Has those conversations started?
The conversation has started in the continent. We talk among ourselves. We've had 2 sessions as a number of countries that are producing critical minerals. It will be ourselves, it will be DRC, it will be Zambia, you can list them, more than that. That we should also determine what is our view on critical minerals. Because if you read the definition by the US, it's not the same as Canada, it's not the same as Australia, it's not the same as China. And therefore it means we will be forced to take a definition by a dominant country in consumption of our critical minerals. We will have to determine it ourselves, then engage the other parties on how we see critical minerals for the future of African continent. Because the continent is rich in mineral deposit, but it is the poorest continent. That is a contradiction. We will have to work together to change that reality, so that the wealth in the continent must reflect in the citizens of the continent. If we can't do that, then it means there's something wrong with the leadership in the continent.
Thank you. Errol, can I just turn to you, because you made some comments about your recent fundraising roadshow and how you've seen a new level of interest from different investment groups on the back of the recent elections and the new coalition government. Are you seeing also conversations about critical minerals and the potential for South Africa to be an international participant in that space?
I'm asking the Minister to empower me. He took my microphone, yeah. Yes, we are seeing it. You know, at the end of the day, it's a case of you have to go where the minerals are. We didn't choose to put the minerals. Fortunately, we are where the minerals are. It is our responsibility to extract them in a way that's optimal for our people, for the people of Africa. I think where there is probably a role starting to open up is, you've got this MSP group and you've got global groups looking at procuring these minerals. Well, it's time that they started putting their money where their mouth is and not just funding exploration and mining. They've got to start putting the beneficiation facilities in the point of source. It's no good that the states who are desperate to get local beneficiation happening just add another layer of beating on the mining companies to do the beneficiation. Explorers and miners shouldn't be smelters and refiners. We've done it when we need to do it. But I'll tell you what, you put a smelter and a refinery there, you see how quickly explorers and miners grow. it'll become a great enabler. And I start hearing that conversation happening. Quite interestingly, the Australian government are quite involved in that discussion, together with the Finns of all people in South Africa, leading the discussion in South Africa. And they're looking for that opportunity of how do they unlock value and create value by enabling. And I think that that first step of beneficiation that can actually be achieved cost effectively is something that's going to make a change. And, you know, that's sort of at the capital cost of a small country's budget. So it's not something for a junior miner to be doing, or an explorer to be doing, or even a major miner necessarily to be doing. But man, you'll see how many more there will grow, because the minerals are in the ground. The investment to get the mineral mining going and the exploration, the discovery happening, that you can access here. And there's a lot of interest to get involved in that.
Thanks, Errol. Brad, I'll turn to you. I don't want to spend too much time on critical minerals because we've got a fantastic panel coming up in a few days' time as well, which Brad will be joining us on. But Brad, can I ask you, you are considering downstream beneficiation, but you mentioned earlier that you're looking at a facility in the US, but that doesn't necessarily mean, does it, that South Africa is missing out on the benefits of that critical manganese as a potential critical mineral?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. So I think we've got a scoping study out. The location of the facility is square bracketed in the US. It's still a live consideration. We've got an evaluation matrix going of factors of where it would be most, attractive from a financial and investment perspective, because as Errol says, they are very capital intensive investments to place a facility like that. From a personal point of view and from a company point of view, we would love to be doing as much as possible in South Africa. And so that is still under evaluation. The sorts of criteria that you're looking at in terms of stacking up an ideal location for one of these facilities. One of them is outbound transport, so that's a tick for South Africa. One of them is energy, and that's something that has to be resolved, but can actually be attractive under certain circumstances. The availability and cost of input, in particular sulphur for a lot of these processes that are based on acidification. Grant funding is part of it, and so I think we'll probably be having the discussion tomorrow around how that works in a global context, and I think what Errol was hinting at is right. More support from customer locations for investment in Africa would be helpful, because at the moment that is the thing that points you more in the direction of other locations in the world, because grant funding's quite a big swing in such a capital intensive investment. So I think that is moving, and these are kind of long studies, really. We're looking at entering the market from a production perspective 2028 or probably a bit later. I think the market's moving a bit sideways now in terms of demand profile. So there's time to work it out. At the moment, what we are thinking of doing is concentrating at the mine, and so there'll be an element of beneficiation and not just transporting ore out, and that will require investment. And as I say, we'd like to do more than that. At the end of the day, it does come down to actually being able to raise the investment, and so there are other factors at play there. But it would be great to see markets that are currently trying to obviously incentivise investment in their own geographies, balancing that up a bit more.
Thank you, Brad. Minister, did you want to add anything to the comments?
Now, on beneficiation, I don't think we should totally prohibit miners from beneficiating their own products. We've seen a number of companies, for example, manganese companies, do beneficiate manganese up to manganese alloys. We've seen chrome miners beneficiating chrome up to chrome alloys. So we can't limit them. But what is important is that all the players must play their role. For example, you can't talk of beneficiation if you don't have a reliable and consistent electricity supply. So the state must ensure that the electricity supply is dependable, is reliable, and it supports companies that want to beneficiate. The second thing is that beneficiation should not be an add-on. It should be seen as a business value in the value chain. and it must generate surplus for beneficiaries. If you can't, they won't get into it. And my own view is that we've seen a value addition in many of these sectors in South Africa. For example, you can take uranium. We are allowed to enrich uranium up to a yellow cake level, but beyond that, geopolitics come in and say, don't go beyond a yellow cake. But capacity to beneficiate is present in South Africa. That's my view.
Thank you. I want to take, we've graduated to the end of the mining chain in the beneficiation and final products. I want to go all the way back to the very beginning of the mining chain because many of you mentioned exploration and the exploration reset we have seen or we're about to see in South Africa. Minister, can you just remind us of where you see the exploration sector at the moment and where you see it going in the next couple of years?
There are areas in South Africa that are actually remain virgin in terms of exploration. The Northern Cape is one such area. The Northern Cape, a lot of potential, underexplored. Very few people. There are more sheep than people in the Northern Cape. Exploration has not been done, and I think that is the area we target. And we have identified a mining belt in South Africa. If you look into the Northern Cape, Northwest, and Limpopo, which are the northern provinces, they are the future provinces for mining. We should have to sustain the other provinces. Like, for example, gold is in decline, but the work done by Westwits is encouraging because we have a number of companies of that size. It's Westwits. You can look at Playford Gold. You can look at Gold One. All those are medium-sized companies that are beginning to take up what is left by major mining companies. So in all those areas, exploration should be diverse. It should cover a number of areas.
Thank you. Errol, can I turn to you? There's been a long-held assumption that the South African prospectivity it's a mature country from an exploration perspective, that regardless of the regulatory system, there's been a lot of discoveries over the last 120 years. All of the best deposits have been discovered. Yet, over that same period, we don't hold that for Western Australia, where there's been just as much exploration, just as much mining. What will a new cadastral system and a new mindset mean for exploration in South Africa?
Look, it all comes down to security of tenure. If you've got a simple, efficient management system in your mineral title, it encourages people to come there and do it. Because when they think they've got money, when the market cyclicity has moved and suddenly there's money available to go exploring for manganese, you want to be able to apply and get your license and move. So it's a massive enabler. Part of a cadastre, you know, we've been really gnashing teeth and fretting about a cadastre mainly because of the mineral title management side of things. But part of cadastres around the world is that it's also the home and the hub and the access to the historical data. Now, the Council for Geoscience in South Africa has done enormous work in actually starting to become functional again. There's been a massive repository of data there that's incredibly valuable. And that's what South Africa, and you know, that's what Kuala Swallows is showing. That's what we're showing. It's brownfields exploration of some of the best opportunities. It's rapid, you can move along quickly. Access to quality historical data, together with security of tenure and an efficient licensing and title. And the Minister knows that one of the, now that we think that we've got the DMRE working very strongly with the industry, the next thing is we're going to gang up on the other departments, because it's not just about getting your mining rights. It's about getting your environmental rights, getting your water use licenses, getting your social and labor plans, dealing with your municipal licensing, your sploomers and these kind of things. In South Africa, we've got a very complex licensing system, multiple layers. I think we're getting to the point that we can start getting the ministries speaking to each other and understanding the interrelationship and efficiencies. and we can unlock some of the last remaining problems. You know, it really just feels like it's just about there. And the cadastre is the center of this, because in Australia, if I go apply for a license, it tells me have I got all the subordinate licenses that I require. It tells me have I got my native title approvals. It tells me have I dealt with everything, and it tells everybody else, tells my competitors, have I done my work. If you go to Canada, you go to all the exploration places in the world, that's what the cadastre does. And that's why we're all very keen to see what this final architecture of this cadastre that's been built does now. Because in the end, it'll manage your taxes, it'll manage your royalties, it'll manage your licensing, it'll manage the data flow. That actually all comes together to make exploration and mine development happen. And in a country like South Africa, where you've got brownfields opportunities, that's what will unlock it.
Mzila, do you think it will, the new cadastre system will be the start of an unlocking of almost a new industry in South Africa, as much as we see here in Western Australia?
So the way I think about it, and as the Minister and Errol have been talking, I'm thinking, you know, how is this not comparable to online shopping? It just happens to be minerals. And, you know, we do a lot of online shopping because we've developed the confidence, I think more importantly, the trust that what you see on your screen, what you want to buy, firstly, your money will be received and you will get the goods. In essence, that's the kind of exchange you're expecting from a cadastral system. So if I'm an explorer, I want to go find a commodity in South Africa. I want to know that if I put in, you know, certain information, if I'm asked certain questions, I'll be able to get a clarity in as far as what is possible, in as far as then following up with investment. So given where we are at the moment and where we're coming from with regards to you know, access to those rights, I think it's going to be a huge game changer for South Africa. We've spoken about how well endowed the country is in terms of minerals. Northern Cape is prospective. I think even in areas where there's been a lot of mining in the past, those remain prospective. And to the extent that we're able to have the cadastral system representing this catalogue of minerals in the country, I think we should see a lot of people coming in for shopping.
Thank you. Brad, you obviously have got an established operation in the country, but we talked earlier about, and what's Mzila said there about clarity and confidence in a system. Are you seeing in recent times a change in investor attitudes towards South Africa and the confidence and clarity they see in their investment in Jupiter or anybody else for that matter?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. So I heard what Errol said, and I'm sure that's right. I've had lots of questions from investors in Australia and elsewhere around the environment, around the election outcome. I think there is definitely a tone of positivity and a hopeful outlook. So I'd agree with all of that. I've been in the job as CEO of Jupiter for 2 years, and Jupiter and Tibia has been around longer than me. So I came into this role expecting to have to deal with some negativity and some concern and risk aversion from offshore investors into our situation, since we're entirely South African focused. And I actually haven't had too much of that, to be honest. There is, you know, a looking through risk, and there are risks in all environments. There are risks in the Australian mining environment, and there are different sorts of risks. So there will be risk in any mining environment. And I think what I've seen through our own investors is actually a pretty good understanding. And whilst there are challenges in South Africa, they've been in the nature of the things that we've mentioned, logistics and power supply. In our particular situation, we have our own power station at site. So yes, we've had some intermittency in the past with respect to supply from Eskom, and that has improved, and that's good. The other side of it, and frankly the major challenge, has been around Transnet, and the fact that in manganese anyway, the challenge there is not performance of the rail line, it's capacity of the rail line. And so that means we're trucking about half of our production. But that is a business challenge that you can deal with. We still, as I showed before, make money doing that. And we are seeing on both the Eskom side and actually on the Transnet side, as Mzila said, productive, positive engagement between industry and government to improve that situation. So aside from those quite practical challenges that you have as a business investor in South Africa, there's lots of things to like. There is great capability, there's actually a very supportive government, there's the opportunity to engage. And I do say to investors here who may raise those questions, there are parts of the world that Australian investors from a mining perspective are happy to invest in that have much greater challenges than constrained rail capacity and intermittent power. Those things can be solved, and we have solved them. We've got a great business notwithstanding those challenges, and you will have different challenges anywhere in the world. So it's about actually working on that in partnership, and we're seeing that happening. So Jupiter's been listed since 2018. It was a successful float. We've been well supported since then. There are questions that come up from time to time, but I haven't seen the sort of risk aversion that I expected when I came into this role 2 years ago. But I do agree with Errol. I think there's a more hopeful and positive outlook, so we support that.
That's a really interesting point you make, and one that Mzila made before as well, about the communication and the relationship between government and industry now. Minister, your predecessor, Mzila's predecessor, if we'd had this panel 5 or 6 years ago, we may have had to provide boxing gloves to each of you. But it feels like there's a change in that relationship between industry, between government, civil society, employees. Is that genuine? Can you talk us through that relationship?
It's an industry I know. It's an industry I worked in. It's an industry that developed me and also abused me. So when I came to the ministry, one of the things that was very important, Mzila, was that when the industry wanted to talk to the ministry, they had to write through a lawyer, and the minister to respond through a lawyer. That was the situation. It's real, it's not exaggeration. One of the things that we invested time in was that let's open up engagement channels with the industry. I think that has worked. We talk to anybody and everybody in the industry about anything. For example, you were talking about beneficiation. We have thrown that idea to the industry, saying, listen, let's start talking about the beneficiation. I was looking at Mzila's slides. He has mentioned the word beneficiation more times than anybody else. And that means that discussion is taking place. So we've opened discussions, and it is always helpful to engage the industry, because the minister doesn't make the industry. And the industry is not in itself without government. So the key is cooperation and working together, is involvement of those workers. My only gripe is that, which is another area, is that the trade union movement in South Africa has grown younger. And when the trade union movement grows younger, it is a negative for the relations, because you don't have the capacity to analyze the situation and understand the complexity of issues that are debated. So it takes longer to reach an agreement. But at the level of government and the industry, I think our relationship is normal. We don't agree on everything, but we sharp at each other face to face. We don't phone, we don't send letters to lawyers. And that is helpful.
Thank you, Minister. Well, the red numbers are flashing in front of us now. So, Errol, did you have anything to add to the Minister's comments?
No, it's this whole government of national unity. It's almost that's what's almost grown out of the relationship between mining and government. It's a very active debate. It's a very aggressive, not aggressive, a very active and ongoing debate. We don't agree about everything all the time. We will whinge and bitch, but you know what? At the end of the day, it's because of a common goal. And that's the one thing that's happening. There's a common goal that's uniting people, and we're driving it forward. And it's working. The numbers are counting, and the numbers are stacking up in the right direction at the moment.
Great. Thank you. Brad or Mzila, did you have any more?
Yeah, I think one constituency we've been spoken about are unions. And, we more recently as perhaps a Monday, a week ago, the Minerals Council engaged with the unions that are represented in the industry on a dialogue around the concerns in terms of the economy and the industry. And it was a conversation not about bargaining issues in terms of wage, but it was about a common concern around where the country is, where the industry is, and where we need to go. And it was a beginning of a series of conversations that will be taking place between industry and labor. And we're all actually also planning for what the president has called a national dialogue at some point. And I think as a mining industry, we'll probably arrive at that dialogue with a common view, amongst the ministry, amongst industry, as well as the labor unions. And that's something very positive for the mining industry for South Africa. Great,
thank you. As I said, I'm an incredibly greedy journalist and I've used up all the time asking questions. We have got time for one question or comment. If we might do two because they're so close to each other. Have we got my colleagues with microphones? Grace is sprinting there. We'll take Tom's question first.
Great panel. Tom Murrell is my name, and I run my own private investment fund, and our investment thesis is to invest in the right commodity, in the right geography, with the right people. I've invested in companies exploring in South Africa, other parts of Africa, and also in Australia. In Australia, we're seeing increasingly green tape, and in South Africa, I've found in particular the BBBEE a bit of a challenge. In terms of ASX explorers, why should I invest in a company exploring in South Africa versus a company exploring in Australia? Thank you.
Minister, would you like to take that first?
Yes. You should invest in both. You should invest in both. Let me explain what I mean. One thing about minerals, if there are mineral deposits and no boat exploits them, they don't move. So it is always wise to invest in exploration everywhere. In South Africa particularly, because we're endowed with deposits, and people must find those deposits, quantity and quality of those deposits, and that's a function of exploration. So I'm encouraging investors to invest in exploration in South Africa, discover that wealth and exploit it.
Maybe just to add, so I think the way I've thought about, so firstly, I think the minister did clear up, but when it comes to exploration, there's no BE requirements. But we all like labels. And I guess for South Africa, broad-based BE is what maybe to other countries is local partnerships. And so I think that's the perspective from which one should take broad-based BE and not be discouraged by it. We've also seen, I think, effort to try and make it consistent so that there's no moving goalposts. So around ownership, employee ownership, and companies have actually become quite creative in terms of, for instance, from an employee share ownership perspective, having an evergreen structure put in place. And that's working. It's something that's also been well accepted by unions. And why invest in South Africa? I think we've spoken about the mineral endowment across different commodities, of which there's several markets and a growing market. South Africa has got a well-developed infrastructure. I spoke about the Magnificent Seven of South Africa from a democracy perspective, constitutional democracy, judicial system. So, we might have dispute, but you'll be able to resolve that in court on anything, if I can say that. I think a well-developed capital markets. I was talking to someone earlier today who was saying, where you do a due diligence conducted by the banks, that actually gives a lot of confidence to your investors in addition to your JOC and the rest. So I think we've got a lot going for South Africa, which is on par with Australia. So actually the advice of investing in both for your own diversification is not a bad advice at all.
Errol, do you know of a company that an investor looking to invest in both countries could benefit from looking at the shares of?
Stock code ORN on the ASX or the JSE, trading at a huge discount. Yeah, no, look, there's a growing number of ASX companies exploring in South Africa at the moment, and they're growing success, and they're getting support now, and I think they're going to get a snowball effect.
Great, thank you. Grace, we've got one more question down here.
Thank you, Wendy Treasure. Errol, thanks for mentioning the mineral titles online and Tangraph, the systems that Western Australia in particular has about tracking all of the requirements for a tenement to get through its life. With regard to the new, shiny new cadastre system that will be unveiled in June next year, what does that have that's similar, but more importantly, given the multiplier effect from freely making geological data available, will the new cadastre system be fee pay or free access to that data?
I'd like to know as well, but look, I do know that answer. It's going to be free and accessible. That is something that we've been promised, and that's something that we believe. I have been speaking to our colleagues at the DMRE that we desperately would like to see what this thing looks like. What does this creature look like that we're giving birth to at the moment? Because, you know, the industry has to prepare itself for it as well. You know, there's going to be reporting that has to go into it. It's going to have to go in a certain format. Don't think that the day that the cadaster's there, everything's going to work. There's going to be teething problems, there's going to have to be growth pains, people will have to align their reporting periods and all sorts of things. But certainly what we've been assured is that it's going to be free, it's accessible, it's going to be user-friendly. I do know that our colleagues at the DMRE have visited over here in Western Australia, for instance, and looked at the system over here. I know that Tegan and her team in Johannesburg have worked closely to try offer that advice, and I think it's going to be a world-class system. The government has chosen, or the DMRE have chosen, a Canadian lead partner in this, but with South African support. So it feels like they know what it looks like, and it's going to be there before I produce copper.
No, except that the reason that we added the international component to the team is that we wanted to do what is best available in the market. Before we started, we visited quite a number of countries, including Western Australia, Namibia, Botswana next to us, and compared notes and then took valuable lessons from there. We're trying to implement them. That's why we've given ourselves 12 months. It took Botswana 18 months. We cut ours to 12 months. We want to have it working within 12 months, and there is an international component to it, to have a comparative study with best practices in the world.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Thank you very much for the great question. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I know it's an incredibly late start for lunch. We don't usually like to keep you from the lovely buffet. So I'd just like to ask you to join me in thanking all of our panelists today.